Mark Purdy is our Chief Fact-Finding Officer at San Jose Rocks. You know Mark from Berkeley News. I can say this in all confidence. No one has researched more about what happened leading up to and on December 4, 1965 than this man. And we're still uncovering information about what happened. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Purdy.
Thanks. Hello again, true believers and fellow travelers. So Dan has amazing energy and and we made a connection, and Dan started this great organization, San Jose Rocks, and asked me to help them uncover information about San Jose's rock and roll history, which is amazing history that most people don't know about, including the fact that you're sitting 10 blocks from the site where the Grateful Dead played its first ever show. I asked the first set how many people knew that, and one person held up his hand. And this is why we want to do what we're doing, so that more people know this. How did I get into it? I was a traveling journalist for many years, read a lot of books, and I was reading the book Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test by Tom Wolfe, which documents Ken Kesey, the countercultural figure, LSD experimenter. And in that book, it talks about his very first public acid test that took place in downtown San Jose on December 4th, 1965, and was the first time the Grateful Dead played a show under the name Grateful Dead. And I naturally said, well, where was this? Because Wolf does a good job describing things, but the one thing he doesn't put is the address, right? So I made it my mission, I got to find out where this is, you know. In the 1950s and 1960s, a lot of people don't realize what a hip place San Jose really was. That song Cassidy that the band just played, it's about Neil Cassidy, countercultural figure. He lived on East Santa Clara Street here for a number of years, where he was visited by Jack Kerouac, a lot of big figures. And San Jose was a really happening spot. There was a coffee house on South First called the Offstage, where people like Jorma Kaukonen and Janis Joplin and Paul Kantner played as they were coming up through the ranks. And so it was that in 1965, things were starting to get really groovy, right? And Kesey decides, I've got this substance, LSD, which was then legal, that he first took as part of experiments at Agnew's. And now he wants to maximize LSD everywhere. So he decides, I want to do these public acid tests and have people in and do wacky, crazy things. So where's he going to do that? Well, he finds out that on December 4th, 1965, the Rolling Stones are playing a show at the San Jose Civic Auditorium on one of their first tours of America. Kesey gets the idea, well, that would be a great way to gather people to come to one of my acid tests. And so he arranges to procure a house that night in downtown San Jose. And he sends his pranksters, the merry pranksters, in their further school bus to the steps of the San Jose Civic Auditorium and hands out flyers that say, can you pass the acid test? Kesey also needs a band that night. Who does he decide to call? His friends from Menlo Park and Palo Alto, who had been previously playing under different names. A number of them played in a band called Mother McCree's Jugtown Champions at the offstage, and then changed their name to the Warlocks for a while, right? And just before then, so a week or two earlier, they decided, you know what? We don't like the Warlocks name. What do we want to call ourselves? Different versions about how they came up with it, but they said, no, we're going to be called the Grateful Dead. And Kesey calls them up and says, can you come to this acid test and play for us as the Grateful Dead? And they said, sure. So on the night of December 4th, it all happens. The Rolling Stones are playing a show at the Civic. The pranksters hand out these flyers that say, can you pass the acid test? Come to this house. They put up posters. Can you come to this house? Can you pass the acid test? Is what the posters say. And Kesey arranges for this house. He goes inside and paints wild stuff, sets up lights and craziness, and the Dead come in and play their first ever show as the Grateful Dead on that site. All right. Sidebar: the Rolling Stones, in Bill Wyman's book, the bass player of the Rolling Stones, he writes about that night and says that Brian Jones and Keith Richards went over there that night to see what was going on there. You can imagine this confluence event. The Grateful Dead's first very show is attended by 2 members of the Rolling Stones in downtown San Jose. Think about that for a minute. The night goes on. It's a wild party. The crowds show up, spill out into the street, and history is made, right? Grateful Dead's very first show here ever happens in downtown San Jose. But I'm still wondering, where the hell is that house, right? So I was writing for the Mercury News in those days. I wrote a story about that and said, but where is that house? A guy, after I wrote that story, a guy called me up, Ron Cook from Santa Cruz, and said, I know where that house is because I lived in it. I said, great, I want to talk to you. Well, he moved into the house at 43 South 5th Street about a year or 2 after this event occurred. But everybody in the neighborhood knew about it and said, this is where that acid test happened, where the Dead played its first show. So I wrote some more about that. And more people came forth and said, yeah, I was there that night. I described some of the crazy stuff that happened. And so that's when Dan and I hooked up and said, we ought to get a plaque on the site of that show. And where is it? So I drive downtown and I turn up North 5th Street South 5th Street from Santa Clara Street. Well, you can't turn right there. I go around the back. You can get up. It's about half a block from the San Jose State campus. Guess what's there now? The San Jose City Hall. In 2002, they cleared that site and built the new City Hall. Well, what happened to the house? I did more research. I found out some of the houses there were moved by the City Redevelopment Agency, and I call up and I said, what about the house at 43 South 5th? They said, it's moved to East St. James Street. Great, I go there, and the house is still there, amazingly so, all right? It's moved 635 East St. James. So I write about that, and that takes us more on our mission to get a plaque put on that site, right? Then another plot twist. About 3 months ago, so Dan and I go before, and some other friends go before the city council and say, the 60th anniversary of that show is December 4th, 2025. We want to raise money privately to buy a plaque and put it on the site of that show, which is now, this is the coolest part, underneath the current city council chambers. The Grateful Dead played its first show on that site. But then another plot twist happens. About 3 months ago, a poster all of a sudden surfaces, one of those "Can you pass the acid test" posters. All right? But on that poster, it says it's at 38 South 5th, not 43. So I go down and also go to the library, get a map in those days and a photo of the map. Turns out 38 South 5th is right across the street from 43 South 5th, which is still on the current San Jose City Hall property. What happened to that house? Sadly, it was a victim of an arson fire and was demolished, okay? But I call back the guy who lived at 43 South 5th and say, what do you know about this? And he says, well, I don't know. Everybody always said it was at 43, right? And so he tells me, and my further reporting and research on this, he tells me that the story in the neighborhood was that Ken Kesey had lived for a while at 38 South 5th and crashed there. And so if you read the account in the electric Kool-Aid acid test, all this happened very quickly, right? Kesey realizes the Stones are playing in downtown San Jose. We can have the acid test in downtown San Jose. Where do we want to do that? Perhaps, my theory is that he knew 38 South 5th because he lived there, so he called and said, can we do that there? They say, sure. But when he shows up there, I subsequently talked to someone who actually lived at 43 South 5th at that time and was there that night. And he said, I don't know. My theory is that they show up at 38 South 5th, and I've seen pictures of it. It's not quite as big as the house on 43 South 5th, which it looks more like the house Wolf describes in his book. I think Kesey showed up there at 38 and the people there were like, whoa, what's going on here? They pull up in that colored school bus, but he knew the people at 43 South Fifth too, because incredibly, it was in the city directory. It was known colloquially around the San Jose State campus as the High House, okay? And in the city directory, it's actually listed as the High House in 1965. So I think they made it on across the street, and those guys said, yeah, sure. And the guy who was there that night says, it all happened at once. The guys, they came in and said, can we do a party here? And they said, sure. Can we collect money at the door to pay for our rent? Yeah, if you want. And all of a sudden, within an hour, everything had moved in. All the crazy stuff with the lights and so forth. And the Dead load in and play their first show. That's my theory. Now, it's quite possible the show was at 38. Still doing some research. If you know anybody who was around in 1965 and might have been there, were you there? Okay. Okay. Well, anybody. If you were, yeah, well, so if you know anybody that might have been there or knows something, please let me know. I want to pin this down to try to get it, whether it's 30 or 38 or 43. But the good news is, both those sites are on San Jose City Hall property. The city has approved us to put a plaque on there. And on December 4th, 2025, we're going to have a hell of a party. All right? And my friend Dan is now going to tell you about how you can help with that. Because as I remember, I said we promised we'd raise the money privately. So here's Dan to talk about that. But that's the story. It's a hell of a story. Would you agree?
Real quickly, thank you very much, Mark. Been with this guy on this journey for 22 years. 22 years, 2003. In any event, this is San Jose Rock's first of 30 projects we have planned in downtown San Jose for the next over the next 3 years, celebrating Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham, the Smothers Brothers, the offstage where Yorma and Joan Baez and Jerry Garcia played and taught guitar. In any event, how you can participate, this has to be privately raised. The city's putting up no money. And so what we did, thanks to a venture capital friend of ours who introduced us to Stanley Mouse. Stanley Mouse designed this commemorative poster, which we're going to be offering in handbills for $124.25, 12 for 65. And for slightly more, you can get an autographed version of the full-size poster. In any event, there's cards over here. There's a QR code. I'm wearing a QR code. At a very minimum, you should follow us on Facebook. There's an email you can sign up. We have a lot of events planned. A curated meal by the executive chef of the Grateful Dead. A little fundraiser. We're going to have some fundraising events at the house that was relocated to 635. Anyway, that's enough of your time. SanJoseRocks.org. Thank you very much. And thank you, Jay, for inviting us in. Thank you, guys, in the band.
Sorry. I didn't know I said it.